Weeks after September 11th, letters laced with a mysterious powder began arriving at newsrooms and Senate offices. The powder was quickly identified as anthrax, and in just days, 5 people died and 17 others were left ill. The investigation spiraled into one of the most complex and controversial in FBI history. So today, we examine the infamous 2001 Anthrax Attacks. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the unknown. I'm your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me, hearing this case, probably not for the first time on this one, Alfredo Diaz.
What up? Yeah, man, people lacing that sweet powder on these envelopes. This was
not no sweet powder.
Not the good stuff. Very dangerous. I remember probably middle school at this point, just hearing about this on the news and everyone freaking out about like, be careful opening your mail. So I didn't really know much else aside from that. I just knew that the adults around me were panicking.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just this little kid going, okay, I don't touch mail. I don't got mail anyways. So I'm gonna go back outside and go play with my friends. And so it's just something that happened kind of in passing that I heard about, but I knew it was a big deal around the neighborhoods and the government, news, all that kind of stuff. I didn't know that it seems as of right now, initially hearing this, isolated to more so the government as opposed to your everyday person.
Mm-hmm.
And at least what the adults around me were talking about made it seem like it's hitting our neighbors. It's
right. Could be anyone.
I know someone that, got some powder in their envelope. And so it just seemed like this super dangerous thing, and that like the male people were in such high danger. But again, initially hearing this seems like it was kind of isolated more towards the government.
Yeah.
I'm eager to learn more.
Oh, yeah. And we'll break it all down. We'll talk about the letters. We'll talk about the investigation. And then there's some nooks and crannies where things, like I say, get a little controversial, but we'll talk about the suspects at the end. What's really interesting about this case and the way you're positioning it is because you're coming in with the memory that you lived through this, which is a rare moment in Red Web when we can talk about our actual memories of how we understood it at the time. And,
Right.
and you're not wrong. The early 2000s were wrought with us being kids and going, that seems like adult problems anyway.
Yep.
And then you go outside, right? The market crash of 2000, the tumultuous terrorist attacks, both this and September 11th, you're kind of like, your mind is blown, but you're still a child. And so you don't understand the full ramifications.
Right.
Then the housing crash a few years later. And so it's just like all this stuff happened and you're just living with the 90s memories going la-di-da.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right, man. It was pervasive. It was literally, it's called terrorism for a reason, and it struck fear into the hearts of many. We watched news reports and news stations in school. I think if memory serves, I was in like 4th grade, because that was my first introduction to seeing, 4th grade might've been the election in 2000. So maybe 5th grade. But I remember seeing the news for the first time for the election, all the controversies happening in this year or two span.
Mm-hmm.
I digress. But yes, we'll talk about kind of the main targets for these attacks. But the reason why I think it extra struck fear into people was because the potential of it being anywhere, and because of some of the people that were impacted in passing. Anthrax is a really insidious bacteria. We'll talk about what it actually is. And so, yeah, there were targets and then there was collateral damage. We'll get into all of it. But before we do, as always, I want to shout out a few of the task force members over at redwebpod.com. We have buff scientist Morgan Andrews keeping us strong of the mind over there. And of course, our squonks of the week are Tucker Did It, G, and Azrael, just to name a few.
Nice little squonks still on the run.
Mm-hmm.
And is this water? Is this remnants of squonk? We don't know.
I don't know if you'd want to drink it if it was squonk, but he
It's
will.
refreshing though.
It's refreshing. It fills the body with electrolytes. And also, just in Red Web news, we record these in advance because if this was happening in the future, Fredo would be sipping that out of the currently available sippy cup of knowledge. We do have the new Sippy Cup Pro available right now as our kind of indie-versary, 1 year of independent venture, and companydom. Those are real words. But you can go to sippycup.pro or store.redwebpod.com to pick that up right now. It is it's advanced, it's researched, and it's a cup. Okay.
Store whatever you want in it. You know what I mean? You want to put alcohol in it? Cool. You don't want to put alcohol? Put some juice in it. Or what I had over the weekend was Capri Sun with alcohol in it. You can mix them both.
Whoa. Listen,
who would have known?
You're living the high life with Capri Sun. Heavy Capri Sun?
Look, I was, out doing research at a club. Okay.
Right.
You never know, like Blade style. And then they had Capri Suns in the Capri Sun pouch. And so here I was, this adult in a club sipping on Capri Sun.
I'm just picturing now, it's a man, Christian. It's actually Fredo with a Ziploc bag filled with juice in it.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, how do you open up the Capri Sun and then reseal it? I don't know. But listen, you can put all of that.
It's a syringe, apparently.
Oh, that's insidious. I don't like that idea.
It seems weird.
That's.
I said, sure.
Yeah, sure.
For research purposes.
And by the way, you bought this out back behind the dumpster, I assume?
Yes, I did.
There was a man with a trench coat filled with Capri Suns. Anyway, avoid the trench coat, man. Sippycup.pro. Get yourself a sippy cup. It is insulated. It can go to work with you. It's the professional model. Okay, you're not going to be laughed at work. It's not orbular. It won't be rolling away from you.
It's not going to potentially roll away from you if it's in a cup size hole.
Yeah. But speaking of anniversaries, we have our 5-year anniversary coming up next month. Some big things planned, so stay tuned. redwebpod.com to stay in tune to all of that stuff. We tease stuff there first and early. Real quick, before we dive in, I just want to say this is what's happening on Patreon over at redwebpod.com this week. On Wednesday, join us live at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time for our live recording of Break Room. If you're there, you get to be part of the conversation. And then Fredo, let us know what's happening on Friday.
Well, we got Red Web Movie Club. We're covering Hell House LLC, a very entertaining found footage movie.
Yeah, that's one of those, when we have the scale of classic to crap, we'll let you place that one. But it's Christian's pick. And
just by name.
Just by name. But we had a great time going through that one. So we'll see you on Friday with that. Let's dive in. Let's talk about this case because there's a lot to unpack. As we dive in, as always, sensitive topics will be available in the description. On October 4th, 2001, Bob Stevens, an employee of American Media Incorporated, was hospitalized in Boca Raton, Florida, after unexplained vomiting and difficulty breathing. He had entered the hospital 4 days earlier with an undiagnosed illness and was quickly diagnosed then with anthrax poisoning. For posterity, the company American Media Incorporated is a publisher of magazines and tabloids like US Weekly and many, many others, and has since been renamed to A360 Media. You might have heard the name. Their collection of magazines and tabloids have changed over the years, but they still exist. I say that because it kind of starts to build a profile for potential targets for these letters. On October 5th, the next day, Stevens became the first person in the United States to die from anthrax poisoning in 25 years. Before this, in 1976, a Californian resident died from inhalation anthrax after working with infected wool imported from Pakistan. So, anthrax. We've all heard about it. We know it's a dangerous material. We've, like you said, Fredo, heard about the powder being in letters, and it kind of became, for kids at least, a meme. For adults, a lot more scary. So, anthrax itself is a rare bacterial infection caused by Bacillus anthracis, and it typically infects livestock, at least here in America. It is a naturally found bacteria. You might find this in soil, and it's contracted when the bacterium spores are inhaled or ingested, or if they make contact with broken skin. Essentially, the spores themselves can get into the body in some way. And these spores are pretty dangerous because they can remain dormant for years, allowing the bacterium to survive harsh conditions. So even if it's not fresh soil, it's very possible that this bacteria, these spores, could still be present. Now, these spores can and have been made into a powder in cases of biological warfare or in acts of terrorism like the one we're about to talk about. Now, depending on how it's contracted, symptoms can take up to 2 months to show up, which is pretty wild. I figured that this was just a few days kind of situation.
That's unfortunate. I don't know, 2 months. And then I'm assuming there's like kind of a threshold in terms of how, effective treatment is if you reach it before a certain point. But something laying dormant for 2 months is That's annoying.
It's very annoying, especially if it's small.
Like, you just kind of want to get through it and get over it, and like to have something linger for that long. Not to mention, like, if you're showing signs of something that has you showing signs of different symptoms or whatnot, then you're just kind of guessing and not knowing.
Yes. And like I said, depending on how it's contracted, it can show up in different ways. And these timelines being up to 2 months can make you think that it's something benign, something small, or something a lot more scary. So let's talk about that real quick. If contracted via the skin, symptoms include blisters, lesions, and flu-like symptoms. Sometimes it can cause blood poisoning and internal bleeding. If ingested, usually from contaminated meat, symptoms range from nausea and flu-like symptoms to bloody diarrhea. This is the least common form. Now, when inhaled, this is the type we're going to talk about for this entire episode. Anthrax symptoms can include trouble breathing, swollen lymph nodes, nausea, flu symptoms, meningitis, shock, trouble swallowing, a lot. It's almost like I'm reading one of those cursed medicine commercials here in America.
Yep.
Could be anything.
The side effects may include
right, yeah.
And it's like, Jesus, is the trade-off worth it?
Right. Now, of course, it can also be very fatal. It can lead to potentially fatal pneumonia, and if left untreated, the onset of severe symptoms can lead to the patient's death in a lot less time than 2 months, within 48 hours, right? So it can—
That's fast.
It's very fast. So it can take up to 2 months to develop some of these symptoms. I think on average it takes a couple of days if it's inhaled, and if the concentration is strong enough to develop symptoms, to develop severe symptoms. And if at that point you don't seek a diagnosis or medical help, that's when death can occur pretty quickly. According to the Mayo Clinic, inhalation anthrax is the deadliest form, and it's the most difficult to treat. So now you have kind of the background of this case. And due to the rarity of this disease, the CDC and the FBI immediately got involved because, again, it's been 25 years, at least in the United States, since someone has passed due to anthrax poisoning. So both the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are both like, wow, okay, what's happening here? How did this happen? It wasn't just an instance where somebody got ill, somebody died. In fact, it was so rare that many experts in the field had never even seen anthrax or an anthrax patient in person, according to the book by Marilyn W. Thompson called The Killer Strain, Anthrax and the Government Exposed. So from here, the CDC tested soil and water from where Stevens had gone hiking in North Carolina before falling ill, as well as various items in his home. They did not find anthrax in any of those locations. However, they did find anthrax at the AMI offices where he worked. So, they then contacted hospitals in Boca Raton for any patients experiencing unexplained illnesses. One doctor actually did notice an unknown bacteria in one of their tests. The patient for that test was Ernesto Blanco, who was another employee who worked in the mailroom.
Yep. It's all, dude, the red thread's all linking together.
Mm-hmm.
See, the difficult thing is, especially in the 2000s, we still had security cameras, but far less, right? If you're just dropping off mail, you're putting this envelope together with gloves carefully, you're dosing it in anthrax, and then you're just going to a random mailbox. It's like, how do you catch someone who's doing that? In the same way, I guess you see in movies where they cut out little newsletters and then piece it together.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, how do you randomly catch someone that's just doing that? And the thing, my theory is like, if you do it once, then you stop. How are you going to get caught? If you don't have this, because you don't develop a pattern, you don't increase your chances exponentially. And so it's just like, man, the number of things in my head that people can get away with if they just do it once and then stop. But then again, I feel like there is a psychological threshold that a person has to reach in order to be able to do something like that. And I don't think that kind of personality or mindset has the capability of shying away from doing it again if they got away with it.
Yeah. It's that impulse, that desire, whether it's attention, the desire to harm or whatever. You're of sound mind and body. So you're thinking soberly, if I wanted to, in theory, I would do this, that, and the other. But you also have the mind that wouldn't go perpetuate something like this. But you're right. I mean, and what's interesting too is that we do notice subtle differences with some of these letters, and we'll get into them a little bit. The way they go about it and their targets all do center around a type of MO, but there is some subtle differences in each of the letters. So workers now at AMI told investigators they had received a strange letter that was actually addressed to Jennifer Lopez. So Stevens was the one who opened the letter. And upon opening it, a puff of white smoke or white material came out of it, and then he leaned in, curiously sniffing whatever this was to try to identify it.
Why would you do that?
It's a natural instinct, you know? You go, what is that? Maybe you smell it. You definitely don't taste it. But now in hindsight, I'm thinking, I get all of my senses away from it. You know, you ask your buddy, hey, what's that? You just hold it. Hey, can you, what does this smell like?
Smell this? Does it smell right to you?
Yeah, I'm not smelling your letter. But yeah, in hindsight, not a wise move. Now, we're not certain if anyone else was there at the time of the opening, but this does point investigators to believe that, hey, maybe this is an isolated incident. Maybe this was a target on J-Lo. At the time, she was at her peak, by the way. 2001, I think she was the first female to top the charts on both an album and a movie, hit #1 for both. She was really very popular at that time.
And she's eternal.
She is eternal.
She looks Sofia Vergara. Do not age.
She doesn't age, dude. She'll be Jenny from the Block for like the next 215 years.
She's aging quite gracefully.
Maybe we do a conspiracy on what's behind all that anti-aging, you know, like the substance.
I feel like it's a lot of visits to the dermatologist.
Listen, I'm going to throw this out there just to feed the beast. What if there's just rooms like Palpatine, rooms of clones, and they're all like, but they have one for every age, and they just body swap into a younger one every so often.
I would just be fearful of the fact of like, I mean, to keep going down this rabbit hole, right?
The pause and then Christian coming in with the cackles.
Because Christian's like, this is wild.
That was a deafening silence.
You've gone off the rails. I just feel like you could easily get into this mix of like who's a copy and who's not.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like every part of you is a copy then, right? Because if you're gonna do if you do it once, you're gonna do it multiple times.
Right.
But also like, what age do I go back in time on my body? Because like, I'm 36 now, and so I have a 36-year-old body, but I'm in a far better shape than I've ever been in my life. So I could go back to a younger me, better joints, healthier back, etc. But then lose all my gains.
You could lose all your gains. And right now, you could be 62-year-old you in your 36-year-old body. Now, we wouldn't know.
True.
You could be older than all of us combined, and we just don't know that yet.
But we do know because I don't know anything about anything. So if this was 62-year-old me, man, I did not learn much.
Right. If you don't know what shrinky dinks are, I think you are definitely, well, actually, you might be a young person thrown up into your body. You might be 22 years old thrown into a 36-year-old.
Yeah. I was tired of getting carded at the bar.
All right. I didn't know we'd go down this path. But here we are. So anyway, this initial letter seemed to be for Jennifer Lopez. Investigators are believing that this is an isolated incident. The case then took on more attention on October 12th when Tom Brokaw's assistant, Casey Chamberlain, tested positive for anthrax over 1,000 miles away in New York City. So Brokaw is a notable news reporter for NBC, very well known, and just 2 weeks prior to her diagnosis, Chamberlain said that she had opened a letter containing what she described as a, quote, sand-like substance. So now, immediately, we have a second instance of a letter with anthrax in it, or so far a mysterious substance, but I think we all know. And so now it's starting to combine, like you said, that red web. The strings are being attached and evidence for a broader case, a not single incident is kind of becoming apparent.
It's interesting to me that they didn't have like an assistant to like go through some of the mail. But then again, I guess just a small thought, it could be labeled as something important. I mean, how many times do you get junk mail, but you think it's important just because of the way it's labeled, you know? Immediate action required. And they go, oh my God. And it's like, you have the opportunity to receive this credit card with this much balance.
Hey, listen, like, what an opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Waste of my time.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, it was Tom Brokaw's assistant. So Casey Chamberlain was the assistant.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So, yeah. So it's like
so now the assistants are in danger. Yeah.
Right. So it's on its way to a high profile individual, which would obviously, if it was J-Lo or Tom Brokaw, of course, these are very high profile individuals that would get a lot of attention. But that's not where it stops, of course. On October 15th in Washington, D.C., Senator Tom Daschle's aide also opened a letter containing a mysterious powder. again, later to be found as anthrax. But this time there was a strange, terrifying handwritten message. This is where there's a slight shift in the letters being sent. We don't know, by the way, I will say this later on, but I'll say it again here now. We don't know what the original letters to Tom Brokaw or Jennifer Lopez said. They're lost to time, and we may never find them. But we do have these letters and what they said. So for your sake, Fredo, I have an image of 2 letters. I'm about to read one of them verbatim, so if you want to take a look at that. But one says at the top, 9/11/01. You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great. Their building was immediately quarantined upon the reception of these letters. Again, these are going to 2 separate senators. Both the letters we're showing you right now, and I'll talk about the second one in a second. But what are you seeing? Anything standing out on these letters visually, Fredo?
The way they're written, someone wrote this and they're trying as hard as possible to, because writing is kind of like a fingerprint. The way you write and sign things is very unique to you as a person. The way you write your O's and your P's and whatnot is different from people to people, and it pieces together to kind of like create this identity through written form. And it looks like they're trying very hard not to display that, which is interesting. They're using all capital words, but they're still writing it out, which is beyond me, and as opposed to like printing it out. The second letter has some like brown stuff on the fold. Looks like rust.
It does.
It really does give off a rust appearance. But this makes me go, this becomes a terrorist attack, as opposed to here's someone doing something nefarious, trying to get away with it. And this is an organization, a group of people targeting specific people that are, and they're not particularly fond of America.
Right. And I mean, that's what the letter would lead you to believe. We'll talk further in the investigation and the suspects on some clarity.
Oh my God. Is it one person? He's trying to throw things off?
Listen, I don't want to spill the beans.
We got a big brain mover over here.
Could be. It could be. I do love your analysis on the handwriting, though, because you're right. While it does match across these 2 letters and another image I'll share with you kind of here soon, what's interesting is that there are some similarities, but then there's times where they like take extra time like to cap the T's, or the A's are a little bit more bold because they kind of go back over them, like you said, almost to obfuscate maybe their true handwriting. It seems like whoever this is, there's definitely some foresight in mind, thinking ahead of the clues and trying to maybe muddy that trail.
It also either seems like their literacy level or they're not from this country. Just like the way things are written.
Interesting.
We have this anthrax. You die now type
Right.
thing. It very seems, which could be, again, deliberate though. Right?
Could be. Yeah, we'll talk about that. But it's very good instincts to talk about, because that is kind of in the immediate aftermath of a lot of these attacks. There was a lot of knee-jerk reactions. Is this so-and-so? Again, we'll uncover it all. But of course now, because this is a senator and this is the 3rd letter of its ilk, they're like, all right, we immediately need to quarantine this building. And then just over a month later, on November 16th, another letter containing anthrax was found on its way to Senator Patrick Leahy, who was also, of course, in Washington, D.C. Immediately following the discovery of this letter, more Senate buildings were placed under quarantine. So, of course, at this point, it's been over a month of this anthrax stuff happening. It is now impacting more government buildings, and it seems like whoever's doing it is running amok and not being caught. And so fear is now desperately spreading throughout the nation, and news coverage is it's like 24/7 at this point, at least by my memory.
Yeah, I mean, this is easy coverage for the news. I mean, it's something that's huge. It could potentially be, targeted terrorist attacks, and that's big. That's alarming for the government, for the country, for the everyday person. And so, yeah, I mean, news coverage, they're going to scoop up every little thing that they can to try and put this out there, get attention, because it's a business, which is understandable. So that's what they're in the business of.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, that it seems consistent, but not consistent all at the same time, because you are targeting people within the government, but then you also have someone like J-Lo.
Right. To me, it's just like whoever's doing this is just looking to spread fear. Go for the biggest artist of the time, or one of, go for the most notable news anchor, and then screw it, those didn't work. I'm going to go straight for 2 senators. And then that'll really get people scared. That'll start shutting the government down. And Even if I'm not successful,
There's an escalation.
Yeah. And at this point in the case, the FBI actually had a code name for these attacks. Not very creative, if I were to say myself. Amerithrax. And so now officially the hunt for the killer is on, and this is where we talk about the investigation. Amerithrax.
Not a great word.
Kind of sounds like a transformer.
Yeah, I could see
A
that.
little cheesy in that way. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Shady Rays. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium, polarized shades that won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company offering a world-class product rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Plus, if your shades ever go missing or take an unexpected hit, don't sweat it, okay? Bigfoot clobbered you in the face and they're broken. Well, they have the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Every pair is backed by lost or broken replacements. If you don't love your shades, exchange for a new pair or return worry-free within 30 days. There's no risk when you shop. Their team always has your back with personal and fast support. I wear Shady Rays all the time. They're essentially my exclusive sunglasses at this point, and you've heard me talk about them over the years. I love them, and I love their polarized lenses, and I love that they keep updating their styles as styles shift. So no matter what your outfits are looking like, they got a style that will fit it. Exclusively for Task Force members, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal. Head to shadyrays.com and use code REDWEB for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. shadyrays.com, promo code REDWEB. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Shopify. If you've ever shopped online, Task Force, chances are you've bought from a business that was powered by Shopify. If you've ever seen that purple Shop Pay button at checkout, the one that makes buying so incredibly easy, that is Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. Shopify gives you that leg up from day one with hundreds of beautiful, ready-to-go templates to express your brand and forget about having to code it all. Tackle all those important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. Spread your brand's word with built-in marketing and email tools to find and keep new customers, and that iconic purple Shop Pay button that's used by millions of businesses around the world. That is why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Your customers already love it, and you are too. I have used Shopify in the past before to set up my own business online to sell things, and I have to say, I love how turnkey they make it, because they have all these templates. And when you have a business, when you have a product, you want to make sure it's organic and that it fits, that it all kind of comes together, and you don't want to need to stress out about design and coding and things. So I love, again, how simple it is to get things started. If you want to see less carts being abandoned, it's time for you to head over to Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/redweb. Go to shopify.com/redweb, shopify.com/redweb. So let's talk about the investigation, though, because it is now spiraling out of control. Letters are being sent. They can't find the person. They're hitting high-profile individuals. As you said, Fredo, to our memory, everyone's kind of scared of opening their mail. Are they going to be infected in some way? Are they going to be targeted? Or is there going to be an accidental contamination of your letters by way of just being in the mail, etc.? Fear is truly spreading.
But also, as of right now,
yeah,
because again, I go back to as a child, everyone being like, don't open your mail, check your mail, it could be anthrax. And as of right now, it very much seems like it's targeted towards high value people.
Sure.
But the everyday person was like, it could be my mailbox right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It definitely could be, but the chances of it happening and the chance, like, it just doesn't seem like it's widespread to the general public.
Yeah.
But that's how I knew it to be, because that's how the adults around me portrayed it to be.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, and I don't blame them, especially when they're surrounded by news coverage of this 24/7. It's terror for a reason. It's terrorism, right? So it's designed to spread that fear.
And there's news coverage of like, anthrax could be in your mailbox right now. And it's like, oh!
Yeah.
And then you actually watch the news coverage. Well, people read headlines and they go, oh my goodness, that's what I get from it. It could be happening right now. The news said it. But then if you actually watch the coverage, it'd be like, okay, all these high profile targets have been like targeted.
Yeah, but when does this person go rogue? When do they mass send out letters, right? Anyway.
Oh, 100%. It could be at any moment in time.
Yeah, because I'm with you, because that's how I remember it as well. But at the same time, we also have the lenses of being able to look back on this with hindsight, knowing that it didn't spread. So it's definitely tough. I could see it both ways. But as the investigation began, they kind of now had, the spot down in Florida where they were already kind of looking at it. But now we know about New York City. And so the CDC decides to test all major news networks in New York City for anthrax. And by doing this, they found it at 2 spots, ABC and the New York Post. In addition to the high-profile targets, there were multiple, possibly unintended victims of the anthrax attacks simply due to the fact that these letters went through the mail. And perhaps this is why people were also a little bit more terrified, because on the way to the high-profile targets, anthrax is so small, it can leak out of these letters, contaminate other letters, and impact people working in mailrooms. And in total, 22 people became ill from these letters, many of which were USPS employees. Within the USPS, the United States Postal Service, 9 employees became ill, 2 of which became ill fatally and passed away. That was Joseph Cursine and Thomas Morris. On top of that, to kind of help elucidate, the regularity, right? We're talking about high-profile targets, but the regular victims. You also have 94-year-old Ottilie Lundgren, who passed away on November 21st, 2001 from anthrax. Though not directly a target, her mail had been contaminated when it touched one of the letters. This wasn't super common, but it just meant that it was possible, and I think that this is the foundation for a lot of that fear. Now, one of the ABC News freelancer producers actually, I believe, brought a baby with them to work. It was like a visit, but either way, their baby at home became extremely ill, likely from this. And so now it starts to be like, okay, well, this is a person who's freelancing at ABC News, then they goes home, and whether the baby was brought to the office or not, it shows that this contamination can get around in a sense.
Right. Yeah.
If memory serves, the source I was reading said that they brought the child to work that day. The child might have come in contact with one of those letters, and that's how it happened. But I don't want to be an authoritative figure on that fact.
I mean, it is a powder, right? And I don't think they're like concealing it or rigging this type of envelope to, once open, explode with the powder or anything like that. They're just lacing it, and then, if it seeps out, it seeps out. There's a lot of gaps within the letter. The mass being worried is definitely warranted for sure, because you just never know when it gets spread.
But I got you though. At the same time, it's fair. You're looking at it and you're like, all right, these are letters on the way. So if you're like maybe growing up in California and all this is happening in New York, maybe down in Florida a little bit too, you're like, all right, well, unlikely that my mail is rubbing up against these more intimately. I can see what you're saying, where you're like,
yeah, you just never know.
There's reasons not to fear because you don't want fear to spread, but
Oh no, it was more so in the extreme angle of just. I remember during the time people was like, "Don't touch your mail,
right?
Don't touch it, don't look at it."
Yeah,
and then people would just be like, "Oh my god, do you have your mail? Like, did you even check it? Do you know what's in there? Is there any suspicious mail?" And I'm like, "Well, we're getting wild right now."
Ultimately, 2 of the letters sent to the news outlets were obtained by the FBI. However, 3 others were inferred to exist because employees of ABC, CBS, and American Media Incorporated all got sick. Of these, only NBC and the New York Post had kept their letters. The rest were kind of almost hearsay. That's not the right phrasing, but they were shared. Like, knowing that it was for Jennifer Lopez is only a spoken fact. We don't know because we don't have that letter, for example. NBC actually has a folder in their offices for suspicious mail, and that's kind of how it got quarantined and identified. And the New York Post letter was still in the trash when employees were sent a letter to check for suspicious mail. When they were told, hey, look out for suspicious mail, somebody went, oh, I know where that is. I threw something away that's suspicious. And so that's how we kind of got lucky that these 2 remaining letters actually got nabbed instead of just being tossed out. So in a weird way, I don't know if this is brilliance on the perpetrator's part or if that's just kind of happenstance, but the evidence was almost just lost, just tossed out.
As much as you're paying attention to the mail at this point that's, coming in. It's just so much that gets delivered to these places, hundreds, thousands on a daily basis. And so how do you keep track of all of it?
Right.
It comes mind numbing with those numbers.
Mm-hmm. So to address the elephant in the room now, we kind of said it at the top, but due to the proximity to the September 11 attacks, the media and the government officials all kind of openly theorized that the anthrax letters were an act of terrorism from Al-Qaeda, but there's no real evidence to suggest this. So far, obviously, we have the letters themselves kind of time-stamping themselves to September 11 and kind of with some of their language trying to attach themselves. But otherwise, there was no other circumstantial or hard evidence linking the two. I'll go into more detail in the suspects about this particular angle and kind of dive in there more deeply, but we'll leave it at that for now. After about a year, the FBI was finally able to trace the letters to where they originally were postmarked from, Trenton, New Jersey. The first two letters had been sent just 1 week after 9/11. So to me, my unofficial kind of musings on this is that whoever did this wanted it to kind of hide in the shadow of a much bigger, much more devastating terrorist attack. And so whether they're related or not was certainly a conversation at the time. With hindsight and evidence, we know it's probably not, but whoever did this definitely went, I'll just hide under that. They did it, and I'll be able to do my dastardly deed. The letters that were sent to the senators in particular were actually postmarked 7:10 a.m. on October 9th. What's interesting, and yes, it took some time to figure all this out, but I love that we can actually have this, is eventually the FBI was able to figure out which machine specifically was processing these letters, known as Machine 17. So when you mail something, it all goes to one major hub, gets processed through a machine that scans for the address, and then buckets them accordingly so then letters can go out to the nation. Now, what complicates this whole process is that Trenton connects 48 post offices and 625 mailboxes. And each and every one of these then had to be tested for anthrax to see what's the origin. Because we know it went through Trenton, but what box, what mailbox, what have you, was it initially put in order to get there? And this then might help us figure out where in town this person might either live, work, or again, it could just be they drove across the country, put them in this mailbox and left. I don't know.
Yeah, but you're hoping at some point in time they slipped up, or they got lazy. Maybe
there's a camera.
Yeah, you're hoping for any type of little insight because it could crack the case wide open.
100%, absolutely. So, as you can imagine, the process for testing all these mailboxes took over a year, and so we know in hindsight that this case was happening, unfolding, being discussed for the better part of a decade. But from these tests, we know, or at least the FBI strongly believes, that the letters were sent from one specific mailbox. And that's the one at the entrance of Princeton University at 10 Nassau Street, Princeton, New Jersey. And the reason they believe this is because it had the strongest presence of anthrax detected when they did these tests.
Ew.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, the anthrax just spreading all over the place. I'm surprised more people didn't get sick from that point of origin.
100%, dude. If you're a student using this mailbox, is it enough that if your hand touches it, you need an open wound, I believe. If it's aerosolized in some way, I don't know. It seems that countless people could have been contaminated with this.
Luckily, less.
Yeah.
But it definitely seemed like it could have just been masses.
Right. 100%. So now at this point, we have those two letters we talked about before, but we also have the envelopes that some of these letters were sent in. And while the addresses on the envelopes are handwritten, much like the note, they once again kind of follow that handwriting that we were talking about. They are all very similar, but there's some interesting ways to obfuscate themselves, right? So I'll point to this next image for you to take a look. You can see the editor at New York Post that went out, the Tom Brokaw letter that went out, and the two letters from the senator. You'll notice in the two letters to the senator, the return address says 4th grade, Greendale School, Franklin Park, New Jersey, 08852.
Interesting.
What comes to mind?
Why is there a return letter on those two as opposed to the other ones?
It's a good question.
And then also, why are they saying it originated from a 4th Like, weird. 4th grade?
Right.
From a school, but you just don't put 4th grade.
Right. To me, this reads as someone whose MO slightly shifted, right? As I was kind of teasing earlier.
Right.
Maybe they realized the 2 letters didn't work out, and so they said, well, let me change my game here a little bit. But also, I think you tapped into this a little bit. When you're mailing a senator and you want it to be opened by them, you know that they have assistants and aides and secretaries and things. You want them to be the one that opens it. Maybe you make up a school or a location and you put 4th grade to make it look like a class project.
Right. They're less likely to like turn down a kid right, that's submitting this.
Yeah. Now, some people do think that the lettering, the writing on these envelopes kind of looks childlike, like they wanted it to look more like a child wrote it.
I could see that.
Which kind of leads itself into the idea of, well, if this is a 4th grade class, let's make sure the senator sees this. That would be touching. And then they'll message back. And so that increases the chance of it being opened and getting that exposure risk and things. But I don't know. To me, the handwriting still feels pretty ubiquitous across all of this. I feel like if they're faking their handwriting, they're faking it into a consistent block lettering.
I mean, it just definitely seems like they're testing the waters and they're seeing what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay, moving on from the letters, I kind of want to break down some more history of the anthrax strain because this is going to be what the FBI really leans on to dial in some suspects. So, if you didn't know, there are 89 different strains of anthrax. And
Jesus.
Yeah, investigators were able to identify the specific strain used in these letters as the one referred to as the Ames strain. So, to give you a crash course on that, this particular strain was discovered in a dead cow here in Texas in 1981.
Oh my God.
The USDA labs in Ames, Iowa, the reason why it has that name, identified and isolated this strain from a sample, after which the U.S. Army began to use the Ames strain in vaccine research because of how aggressive and lethal this strain was in animals. And so that's the history and trajectory of this. And the reason why you need to know it is because to have access to the Ames strain, yes, it was isolated from a naturally existing sample, but it was isolated in a lab, and the only way to get access to the Ames strain would to be involved with the government research or to be in a high security lab with special clearance, which immediately minimizes the pool of people you're probably looking at.
Right. And it also makes you question, like, who's betraying their country. It starts to get deep conspiracy type stuff here.
Always. It almost always does. Suffice to say, legal access to this strain comes with strict oversight, some high level of clearance for certain labs. And again, we'll talk about this more in the suspects discussion. Ironically, though, while the FBI was relying on scientists to help them with their investigation, they also kind of had to be suspicious of the scientists as well, because if they know about anthrax, especially the Ames strain, suddenly they are also now in the suspects pool, which I've never seen that before. You have to trust the people who are also kind of the suspects, and that's almost like a movie.
Yeah, it really is. It's very cinematic.
Yeah.
But you have to, right? Because who else is going to have the knowledge and know-how?
Right. And also, will all of these people who are experts on this strain or this bacteria all be the culprits? No. So
chances are very high that there's someone there that's trustworthy.
Yeah.
And then also if there's someone there that isn't trustworthy, as long as you are spreading out the tasks to people, then they will either more likely to reveal themselves if they're still trying to do these nefarious deeds, or, they'll just go with the flow and you still get the answer you want anyways.
Right. So from here, the FBI identified every lab and researcher that would have had access to the Ames strain, and then they matched them against a pretty robust set of criteria. In their words, they said, quote, 1, access to the Ames strain of anthrax. Makes sense. 2, knowledge of Bacillus anthracis production protocols. Also makes sense. 3, laboratory experience and capabilities related to microbiology. 4, allegations of wrongdoing. And 5, motivation to perpetuate the attacks. End quote. So, obviously, lining up every possible suspect with this profile, they actually closed in on 2 scientists that we'll discuss again in the suspect section not too far from now, but the government also requested samples of every anthrax culture present in government research laboratories. To kind of wrap up the investigation as we head into the suspects and the theories, during the almost 10 years of the Amerithrax investigation, investigators received over 17,000 tips, they interviewed over 9,000 people, and conducted 67 searches. The FBI finally closed their investigation February 19th, 2010. So this went on for quite some time.
Yeah, very, very long time.
Yeah. So any thoughts before we dive into the two scientists and some of the other angles?
I guess it's like, yeah, how would you pinpoint someone like this? You know what I mean? So I'm very interested to see in the theories of like who could have done this or what organization could have done this. Because as of right now, it does seem, like a terrorist attack. It seems very targeted to a certain group of people. I don't know, maybe just me overthinking it. It could very well be an everyday person. And then they've just masked all of this in confusion,
Right. I mean, you take it at face value, and Al-Qaeda, Iraq, all come to mind. We'll talk about that first foremost, dive into that one, and why that's, at the time when this all happened, why it was so prevalent. I think the answer is obvious, but we'll talk about it. But yeah, then the other two scientists as suspects, and of course on top of that, we have a conspiracy. There's always the idea of a cover-up, why and what have you. But yeah, to me, if you take it at face value, that's where the first kind of discussion comes from. But then second, if you look at, okay, well, they tried to hide their handwriting, and they did it immediately following a devastating terrorist attack, and they tried to attach it to that terrorist attack, and then they labeled it as coming from a 4th grade class. And it does feel like there is some premeditation to hide a trail, but we'll talk about all that. So here we go. The first suspect or group we're going to talk about, of course, and dive deeper on is Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So given the proximity to September 11 attacks, FBI Director Robert Mueller made a public statement blaming Al-Qaeda. It's also been reported that the White House was actually pressuring him to share this at the time, and eventually both the president and the vice president openly speculated on the possible connections. Of course, there were a slew of other news anchors and politicians all speculating on this matter. Despite the timing, however, and it does seem like it would be an easy connection, there really wasn't any evidence. On top of this, there was some conflicting reports about an additive that was found within the samples of anthrax called bentonite, which then, through a long chain of explanations, implicated Iraq and Saddam Hussein, but this was unsubstantiated. The White House itself said that there was no bentonite in these samples, and I just want to say there's a lot of complexity, and there's a whole rabbit hole to the bentonite additive angle, and it does seem that ultimately this was a dead end, that chemical wasn't involved in the anthrax. And eventually the White House itself, like I said that there was no bentonite, and therefore that kind of robs this whole angle of any weight or any proof. And either way, I mentioned this though because the claim stayed on the news for years following the attacks. It's kind of only natural given the letters and the proximity to the attacks themselves. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by Huel. Right out of the gate, I just want to say Huel is amazing. This is a product I actually use all the time, so I'm so glad to have them as a sponsor because I am trying to watch my macros when I'm working out, but I'm also trying to make sure that I'm staying well fed. I'm lowering my carbs, I'm increasing my protein, and I'm increasing my fiber. That's something I don't pay attention to enough, and I'm doing that all with Huel Black Edition powdered food, and I'm putting those scoops right in my morning smoothies to make sure that I'm getting everything that my body is looking for and staying full while doing it. So our friends at Huel, like I said, today's sponsor, they've got you covered. It is spelled Huel, and their Black Edition ready to drink is a complete meal in a bottle, so you feel full, focused, and ready for your day. There's no prep, no cleanup, just grab and go. Huel's already sold over 500 million meals around the world, and now it's your turn to try it. New customers get 15% off at Huel.com when you use our code REDWEB. Huel is a perfectly balanced meal that saves you time, designed by experts to provide all the nutrients your body needs from a meal. Huel takes the guesswork and time out of healthy eating. Start saving time and money without compromising your nutrition today with this exclusive offer for new customers with 15% off using our exclusive code REDWEB at Huel.com. That's 15% off for new customers using our exclusive code REDWEB at Huel.com. Please see our description for terms and conditions. Skip the stress, not the nutrition. Try Huel today for complete nutrition bottled. This episode of Red Web is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life comes with a lot of pressure to keep up, hold it together, manage everything that we carry day to day. Each of us has something different on our plate. And it's no surprise that millions of people struggle with their mental health, often not realizing it, sometimes dealing with situations where they could use more tools to help. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Real strength comes from opening up and taking steps toward feeling better, not just for others, but for yourself. I appreciate BetterHelp's role in beginning your therapy journey because it helps you find the right person and it allows you to change to find that right person pretty easily. There's a lot of stigma that comes with finding the therapist that you need or talking about these things. And like I said, I find that BetterHelp is a good tool to begin this journey. With over 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. The app has a store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on 1.7 million client reviews, so that says something. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/redweb. That's betterhelp.com/redweb. But this is where the more evidence-based suspects come to mind. First of all, we have Dr. Stephen Hatfill. So he was popularly called a person of interest in the media. In fact, there were 8 people that pointed him out to the FBI. One of the red flags pointed out by the New York Times in the months leading up to these letters was the fact that he had been filling multiple prescriptions of Cipro, which is an antibiotic, but it was also the medication commonly used at the time to treat anthrax. So he claimed that he had a lingering sinus infection, hence needing to use Cipro. His lawyer in the years to come, Tim Connolly, later explained that a doctor had prescribed him Cipro after a sinus surgery. So things are lining up interestingly, but let's continue. The other major piece of evidence was Hatfill's potential access to the restricted strain. So Hatfill was formerly a researcher at the United States Army Medical Research Institution of Infectious Diseases. We'll refer to them as the USA, MRIID. And he worked for them from 97 to 1999. This is the same research institution that was studying the Ames strain for the use of vaccinations and trying to develop a vaccine. So it does seem like the stars are aligning for this to be the person.
Right.
On top of that, Hatfill told coworkers and friends that he knew how to weaponize anthrax. Hatfill had knowledge of how to weaponize anthrax specifically through the mail, and he seemingly performed multiple presentations including this information.
Not something you just want to go and tell people, to be honest. Is this also around the time where the anthrax stuff was happening when he told people?
So he worked there from 97 to 99, so this is
no.
A few years leading up to it. He's talking about how it could be weaponized, how it could be used in the mail.
Man, unfortunate. And then all of a sudden, years later, it's a big, huge attack on the country.
Right. And also, in the months leading up to that, he's supposedly fulfilling a prescription that would help him stave off any anthrax illness. So if he's working with it, that's something he would need. But again, is it coincidence or is it actual evidence, right? And ultimately, all the evidence against Hatfill was considered circumstantial.
It does seem to lean a little bit more circumstantial.
It's definitely a not flattering look, but the fact that this person's so openly talking about how anthrax could be weaponized, it seems like he's trying to educate his colleagues about this, and maybe one of the colleagues was like, that's a good idea. I don't know. Is this a man flexing his guilt before it happens? Telling on himself before he does it? Or is this a man that understood that there was a danger at hand and had some foresight? So he was alarming people to say, hey, we need to be aware that this could happen. And then it did happen, right? It could go either way.
It can go either way. I'll lean towards the foresight and the unfortunate circumstance and the parallels here, because I feel like in order to pin everything on this one individual, you would need more. And it seems like the court agrees as well, or the government.
Well, this then brings us to suspect number 2, Dr. Bruce Ivins. So this man was brought to the attention of the FBI because of his work in microbiology. He actually assisted the FBI in distinguishing copycats from the real anthrax letters. So I go back to my very ironic situation where the FBI needs to rely on people that themselves could be guilty, and now one of the two suspects they narrowed in on is one such person. He was a senior microbiologist at USAMRIID and worked with cholera, plague, and other diseases, but he was considered an expert on anthrax. Ivins had a history of mental illness, and in particular, his therapist reported to the FBI that he had made many homicidal threats towards her and others.
Okay, so this person mentally a little unstable.
Making threats? An expert with anthrax?
Yeah, so it's not a good look.
So far, so bad. On top of that, he had a history of stalking a particular college sorority and its members, and he was also known to be paranoid by people that knew him, and told others that he felt that he had multiple personalities. Now, on July 27, 2008, he did end his own life. At that time, he was still an employee of the USAMRIID, so that was like years after this incident went down. And the FBI themselves claimed that they were days away from indicting Evans and suggested that his suicide may have been due to his guilty conscience. So the evidence is already pretty damning, but it doesn't stop there. In 2007, microbial forensics sequenced the DNA of over 1,000 Ames Strain samples, and with that, they were able to zero in on the one that originated from Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. So this was a flask of anthrax spores known as RMR 1029. I have an image for you, so you can take a look at what that flask looks like. But this flask with this particular substrain, the DNA structure of Ames anthrax, was accessible by Ivins, and the FBI claimed that this was the evidence that pointed to Ivins as the sole culprit for these letters.
Oh, dude, it's just like seeing that hard evidence right there.
Yeah.
The signed, like the beakers and stuff. This is the buff science.
Oh, yeah.
Tools. Kind of scary a little bit.
Yeah, I almost hope that that's like a Hollywood like dramatization rendition of it.
Right.
Because it has been in publications, it has been in video. But like it's so casually just like RMR 1029.
Yeah, it's just I don't know, it looks breakable.
It looks very breakable.
It looks very fragile for it being what it is. That's all I'm gonna say.
That is a great point.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't think about that.
I don't like it. I don't like looking at it. I don't even want to be in the same room as it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Like looking at the picture is already spooky enough. Yeah. So here's the thing. Let's talk about RMR 1029. It was created in 1997 and was available to hundreds of other scientists at multiple different labs across the United States. It's not like Ivins was the only person. And the fact that it was around in 97 also does say that maybe Hatfill had access to this beaker. But the National Research Council's review requested by the FBI stated this, quote, "This possible explanation of genetic similarity between spores in the letters and in RMR 1029 was not rigorously explored during the course of the investigation," end quote. And also in this review, it states that RMR 1029 is not the only place the letter spores could have come from. That said, due to the nature of cultures changing and bacterial contamination, it doesn't mean it's not the source. All this is to say is this could be the source, this flask right here. But it doesn't guarantee that it's the source, it's just a high likelihood, including some others. It's kind of a wrinkle, but
I mean, still high likelihood that's the source, and there's the picture, and
yeah,
it makes it all too real.
Right. And so we could go back and forth. This is why it's kind of maybe unsolved. The person ended their life before they could be indicted, and so it might forever stay open kind of situation. But
right,
Ivins' anthrax cultures are considered to be, quote, the most likely source, end quote, according to Jason Bannon, a microbiologist in Nature magazine. According to Richard Spurtzel, an expert in biological warfare who held multiple high positions at the same institution, USAMRIID, the anthrax from the letters was, quote, a product of exceptional quality, end quote, and far beyond what a scientist could produce with at-home equipment, again, in their opinion. That I want you to kind of keep in your mind as we talk about the cover-up conspiracy. I dive a little deeper into some of that.
Yeah, I mean, how does one person take that and terrorize a country?
Listen, I'm not buff enough to know how to isolate a bacterium and to powderize it, add some additives to it to make it more airy, more able to be aerosolized in some weird way. But of course, someone's got a buff, sinister mind and was able to do it. So ultimately, the FBI believed that Ivins acted the way someone who was guilty or had a guilty conscience would act. But in particular, Ivins sent multiple samples of the Ames strain to the FBI, and one of them did not match at all, and he couldn't explain why it didn't match. So was this him trying to keep the FBI off his trail? Was this him actually trying to help and he's actually innocent? There's room to kind of toss that around.
Yeah, you can dispute it either way.
And to cap off this suspect, I leave you with a kind of ominous wrinkle. It doesn't clear this person of any guilt, it just adds complexity to the situation. The FBI never did find Anthrax in Ivan's home, car, or any of his personal property. It doesn't mean that he didn't operate solely out of the office, but that's also kind of spooky to know that at this, research institute, you could just be bumping shoulders and elbows with other scientists while this guy's sitting at his desk writing these letters and sending off deadly samples and maybe knows how to clean himself up.
You never know.
Yeah.
Right?
That feels like a pretty convincing suspect, all things considered, the profile, the MO, what have you. But of course, when the government is involved, there's always the conspiracy angle that there was a cover-up. So let's talk about that. Because of investigators' focus on Ivins as a sole perpetrator of Amerithrax, some have suggested that there was a cover-up by the FBI. On October 25th, 2001, Tom Geisbert, a scientist at the USMRIID, discovered the presence of extra elements in the anthrax spore samples. I believe the White House was told about this the day prior, so this was known that there were additives to this anthrax sample, but he himself decided to take it under electron microscope and figure out what else is in there, and he found silicone and oxygen. He explained that the silica was powdered glass, and it looked so fine, it was so microscopic, and he described it as, quote, fried egg gunk dripping off the spores, end quote. Basically, so fine, it implies that it would take advanced hardware, advanced technology, advanced knowledge to make this happen. Would one person be able to do it? Would a team be able to do it? These questions are kind of arising. Per the book Dead Silence, the science community pointed out that the weight of the additive silica in the anthrax would inform investigators whether or not the anthrax was made in a private or sophisticated laboratory, the latter of which would require the involvement of multiple people, and maybe these people didn't know. Maybe they did know. Silica, just to say it, is part of the weaponization of anthrax. It kind of makes it more airy, more light, able to be picked up into the air, and then allowing for inhalation, which makes it more deadly. Silica would also require more advanced techniques in order to add it. So from all of this, news outlets were now reporting on a advanced or more deadly strain, which themselves kind of implied would be more sophisticated. It would take more people, it would take more advanced equipment, and the discussion of additives in the samples followed the investigation essentially until its closure. This was a parallel conversation happening because it would lean the suspects one way or another. Is it a group or is it an individual? And when the FBI eventually came out and claimed that a lone individual could have created these anthrax spores with as little as $2,500 and readily available equipment, it kind of went against the grain of what all these stories had been building up over the years. And so it kind of spurred on this idea of a cover-up. A lot of people began to subscribe to the idea that it's too advanced for one person. It needs a whole lab. And I think that is the foundation for this cover-up theory to really jump off of.
I think it also kind of minimizes who has the capabilities of doing it, right?
That's a good point.
Because also it's if they need all these things, access behind closed doors, then from there, it gets into the conspiracy, who behind closed doors is doing this, etc. But I don't know. I feel like you can take some comfort in the fact that it's this isn't just Bob in his garage making this stuff. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. Because if it was Bob in his garage, anyone anywhere could be doing this. And then suddenly that's a lot more terrifying. But I do think, and I don't want to sit here and pretend that I've identified the origin of a cover-up theory or conspiracy. But to me, just as a person reading about this, it does make a lot of sense. When the messaging is going one way and the FBI comes out and says, almost antithetical the other way, it isn't a group, it's an individual with $2,500 and available equipment. I do think that that's what made people some people lose trust in the FBI and say, well, maybe you're covering this up. This is where I do want to also say, as we kind of wrap up the cover-up theory here, there's a very complex discussion regarding the additives found and potentially found in these samples. Many have spurred small theories that aren't fully substantiated, but suffice to say that this rabbit hole continues for anyone in the task force that is interested. I encourage you to go to read further on this particular line of thinking if you want to go deeper. Again, since a lot of those things were unsubstantiated, I didn't want to just kind of dive into it, and it would double the length of our discussion just here, and it gets very complex. But to cap off the idea of a cover-up conspiracy, okay, there's one final element here. And I can't find a whole lot of evidence to support it, so just to put that out there, but it was believed that the US government may have known about these attacks before they happened. Why do people believe this? Well, Cipro, the medication I talked about before, that was at the time prescribed to help anthrax victims, was given to the White House staffers weeks prior to these letters going out. This might just be coincidence, but given the high profile of this case, the government's involvement, of course, it's going to fuel the idea of a cover-up. I couldn't find much further on why Cipro specifically was handed out, if there was an infection going around the offices at the White House.
I mean, it's the government, right? So they might have most likely have caught wind of this stuff before the general public. And so they were handing it out to like the proper people that needed it. But it is a little tricky when you kind of go, oh, okay, you guys already knew about this and you're trying to contain it and conceal it. I understand to some extent the whole, like, we don't want to cause mass hysteria, all that. But I'm not necessarily with the government, but I also understand that they're always in a lose-lose situation regardless of what they do.
Yes.
So, because for me, it's like, well, you do this, I don't trust you. You do that, I don't trust you either.
Right, right. So, you knew something.
So it's difficult. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
To not look at it in such a negative way of like, oh, you knew and you're trying to get ahead of it. And then it broke out. And now you're dealing with it.
I can also picture a world where they have like 7,200 different protocols for things that happen. They have to plan for every possible event as a government. And sometimes the events they plan for might come to specific fruition, and sometimes they might never come to fruition.
I mean, that's a very specifically targeted, like, it just seems so specific.
It does. I'm with you. I see why the conspiracy is there, but just to devil's advocate here, if they are built to anticipate anything that could happen, we just had a huge terrorist attack, buildings went down, planes were hijacked, etc. What do we think could possibly happen next? Let's pull the ripcord on the anthrax protocol. Let's go ahead and just get this medication out. And then maybe coincidentally they were right. Or maybe they did know and they didn't stop it because they couldn't. Again, that's where you start to get really wild with it. You could just keep going and going with conspiracy.
Right, yeah, it's never ending.
Yeah, the government's in a no-win position because whether it's coincidence, whether they knew, whether this is just not even a real fact, unsubstantiated, it doesn't look good for the government. And anytime.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. Like I said, there's no winning for them for sure.
Right. And I think that's why government conspiracies and cover-ups, I think, will always follow these high-profile government cases. But man, this has been the twisty, turny, lot of rabbit holes to explore case of 2001's Anthrax Attacks. This was really interesting to dive deep on. Jillian did the principal research, but as I'm reading through these articles, I am learning a bunch of things that childhood me had no idea about.
Oh, I had no idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much to it.
There really is.
And I'm sure the rabbit hole goes much, much deeper as well.
Yeah. I'm sure you can see by the runtime that this is a meaty one. And even still, there's like stones left unturned, thoughts, lines of questioning, lines of investigation that kind of didn't go anywhere. So if you're interested, you can continue to research this. We did our best to kind of find the through thread that led to the suspects, but it's an interesting and scary case in the not too recent past. But yes, Fredo, this has been the 2001 Anthrax Attacks Task Force. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Because of you guys, we ended up in the top video podcast of Spotify. They shared that as of recording this today to put a timestamp on this. But thank you guys so much. You know, if you want to continue to support the show, you can do that in several free ways. Share this with your friends, anybody that you think would love these discussions, love mysteries, love the unknown. anybody that has a theory, any conspiracy friends out there. But also you can support the show directly by going to redwebpod.com. For as little as $5 a month, you get weekly exclusive all over the place. And we have shop discounts over there. We have the Movie Club podcast. We have monthly gameplay videos. We have live podcast recordings called The Break Room now. It's a newer show. We have lots going on over there to kind of say thank you for your direct support. But with that, Fredo, I'll see you. Oh yeah, and the sippy cup. Sippy cup. Get your knowledge, shove it in the cup, whatever you want it to be, and then sip that down. But with that said, Fredo, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.